couple months ago, I claimed to have solved the Survival Logbook, and revealed the crying child's real name in the Foxy grid, by matching the crying child's only 4 responses to 4 of Cassidy's many statements. Then I used the page number of Cassidy's questions to get a coordinate, and insert it into the Foxy grid to get each letter, which in the order of his responses, made a VAD. Then I used the constant reminders to reflect something, mainly the giant in-your-face mirror, to reverse the letters to get Dave, the crying child's name. This isn't the first time Dave has been used either, as William Afton's alias in the series is named Dave, even as recently as the new FNAF book the week before seemingly referencing it, meaning he possibly took his dead son's name, something with a lot of emotional charge, as a way to disguise himself. Later on, I also gave my solution to the infamous tally marks, which I connected to the first page with my name on it, and I theorized that they were actually meant to be how we started the search for Cassidy's name, as the Foxy grid was used for the crying child's name instead. Since that video, however, I've discovered some more and new evidence to back both solutions up at the same time, share some things you may have missed, and I also wanted to go more in depth into the main 4 statements that are responded to for those who thought they were a little too much of a stretch. So subscribe so maybe we hit 250k before the end of the year, turn on notifications, and let's get into it. In the last video, I proposed that the tally marks were meant to be the catalyst to the hunt for the Cassidy name search, which surprisingly a lot of people seem to actually agree with. Although after looking back through everything, I noticed something big. The puzzles for Cassidy and Dave are actually more connected than we realized, by being completely different. That may sound very confusing, so let me just explain. Cassidy's solution seems to be all about using numbers specifically, from the numbered tally marks to begin it like I've theorized, to how all the coordinates are obtained via the number connections throughout the logbook, such as the altered page numbers, the random numbers in the book itself, and numbers Mike's written in. Dave's solution, however, then happens to be all about using text, from the ABC to begin it, to how all the coordinates are obtained via words, using the questions and answers throughout. Both puzzles just happen to be the exact opposite of each other. Then remember that the way to solve Cassidy's name is by using an altered word search, while the way to solve Dave's name is by using the faded ABC grid, both the numbers fading out and the faded text on the grid itself, despite the fact that the entire logbook makes it clear as day that Cassidy was the faded text, while Dave, the crying child, was the altered text. They're helping the other remember their name, again using the exact opposite solutions to solve them both. Then also, something fellow YouTuber Ozone mentioned in his reaction to my video is that the tally marks happen to be 7 tallies of 5, while there's 1 tally of 4, which Cassidy's name happens to be 7 letters long, and she's the 5th of the missing children incident, while Dave's name happens to be 4 letters long and he's killed separately / ungrouped. But wait, you just swapped the methods for the 2. Precisely my point. For the 3rd time, the exact opposite solution is used between the 2, further proving the intentionality of it all. But now I would like to give quite a hot take to spice this video up that I noticed right after the video was out. Here we go. How we get Dave is actually more consistent and solid than how we get Cassidy. Seriously, let me explain. Dave is very simply the page number of the statement that's responded to for all 4 letters, which while yes, some use context clues, that doesn't change the fact that it uses the same exact method for all 4 letters, putting a statement to a response. Cassidy, on the other hand, uses altered page numbers for the first couple, but then suddenly it uses altered quiz numbers, random numbers on a chalkboard in the book itself that requires you to put 3 numbers together in order to get the final number to solve the letter, which none of the other letters require. Then there's random highlighted numbers, and finally numbers that Mike himself writes into the book that isn't even out of place or anything like the other letters were. Mike even writes other numbers throughout the logbook too that aren't even used for this solution. So in conclusion, we have Dave, which has 4 letters using the exact same method. The only possible difference you could say is that the first and final letters both use a visual clue, sure, while Cassidy has 4 letters using the same method, but then the other 4 letters are using completely different methods, the only connection between them being numbers. This isn't to say Cassidy is wrong at all. In fact, I think Scott mentioning the name as the most accurate movie screenplay outright confirms that it's the right name, as well as using the name in the novel trilogy for one of the missing children. But my point is that Dave has actually gotten more consistently and solid than Cassidy is, despite the Dave solution being framed by some as more complicated, as having more problems in its solution and is a code that doesn't work. I think in becoming so used to Cassidy being solved, we've forgotten what the mix and matching path to get to it actually was in the first place, as well as how some parts of it were literally just guessed after trying and failing multiple things, including the whole final put it into the word search grid solve itself, which had no hints towards it and was just tried since the Foxy grid was coming up with nothing. In fact, upon comparing the two and looking for any more connections, something that I noticed that I can't believe I missed the first time, which I just mentioned, is that both of these puzzles just happen to be completely fine for most of their solutions. But then suddenly, for both of their final letters, they suddenly and out of nowhere require Mike's input to help. For Cassidy's, it's Mike's 811 that he writes to get the final correct coordinate, while for Dave, it's Mike's nightmare drawing to get the correct answer for the correct coordinate. Both puzzles quite literally end in the exact same way, reflecting each other again. That's so important and everyone missed it, even I did. Both solutions for both names, Cassidy and Dave, both require Mike's input to get their final letter and to bring both puzzles to a close. I don't know how I missed this. But let's take a step back and review the biggest issue proposed with the Dave solution itself, before it's even solved into Dave, mainly about the responses to the questions themselves being a bit shaky. So let's actually go through them thoroughly one by one to ensure that these are likely the correct statements that the crying child is responding to. Although before any of this, why would we even assume that we're looking for the crying child's name? Well, very simply, the person we know as Cassidy is asking who we know as the crying child, do you remember your name? In the exact same book where a bunch of my names were a hint towards Cassidy's name being solvable. But how do we then assume that we get anything from attaching Cassidy's statements to the crying child's responses? Well, not only do we know that there's a puzzle focused on text thanks to the Foxy grid itself, unlike Cassidy's puzzle which is heavily focused on numbers, but it's also the fact that Cassidy makes 11 statements, most questions, yet the crying child only provides 4 responses, seemingly making these 4 responses important for some reason in some way. So we have only 4 mysteriously important responses to the countless statements made throughout the book, and also a puzzle that requires a focus on text specifically to solve and not numbers. So simply put 2 and 2 together to notice that we need to use the only 4 important conversations between the two to help get us our Foxy grid solved for the other conversator's name. But moving on to the statements and responses themselves. First is does he still talk to you, with the response I can hear sounds. Now this one already sounds a bit iffy. Although something a lot of people missed, even I did, is that this actually uses a context clue to figure out the correct response. With the process of elimination, we know that the auditory answer, I can hear sounds, would either be responding to the auditory questions, does he still talk to you, or is this song familiar to you? But how do we choose which one is the correct one? Easy. One question is directly and undeniably linked with the crying child when it's matched together with the image right next to it, the infamous Fredbear plush. The other question, however, is asking whether the crying child has ever heard whatever song it is, and therefore has no feasible connection to him at all. He may have never even heard it. It's literally Occam's razor to a T. If you have 2 competing ideas to explain the same phenomenon, you should prefer the simpler one. So which one do we pick? The one that uses a visual clue to simply connect it back to the crying child. It also makes sense in general when we learn that in FNAF World, the same voice from the Fredbear plush at the end of FNAF 4 is still talking to the crying child, and so he would still be hearing it. The only other argument I've seen for this one specifically being wrong is that it just seems weird conversation-wise, which I personally don't see as a debunk, as to me it makes sense. Does he still talk to you? Refer to the Fredbear plush. I can hear sounds. Not only this, but the visual clue right next to it is also used to directly answer who the he is in the question itself. Is it Afton, Michael, someone else? Who is the he that's apparently still talking to him? Cassidy's question is only made clearer with the image right next to it, which is very important to keep in mind for later. Next is the party was for you, with the response it was for me. This is quite a simple one, and I feel like I don't need to go too in depth into it. It's almost undeniable that those two connect directly. Then we get what do you see with the response I can't see. Again, another simple one that is almost undeniably connected, although this one actually also includes a context clue if you're somehow not sure, which, like the Fredbear plush, just happens to be right next to the question itself. Then finally we have do you have dreams, with the response I'm scared. This is the big one, and what this entire theory depends upon. Although I personally think it's actually quite easy. Just like the Fredbear plush and I guess the mirror, in order to link it with the crying child and to get the correct question, you simply use the in-your-face image of Nightmare, which just happens to be right next to the question itself again, and just happens to be classified as a dream instead of a nightmare, just to get the point across even more. Under the perspective of a puzzle maker, that in itself is a very direct and clear visual clue provided for us to put the question together with the image. To get the final and seemingly correct corresponding answer, I'm scared. To me, this is actually very simple, with almost no complication needed. I get you may think it's weird to use a context clue, but the Fredbear plush actually does the same thing to ensure that you get the correct question, and this clue specifically had 2 entire pages to be drawn on. Yet it just happens to be drawn literally right underneath the question itself. If Nightmare was on the other page, sure, it's more stretchy, but it's right underneath it to put it all together. Do you have dreams? Refer to the nightmare imagery. I'm scared. Cassidy's question is only made clear and connected with the crying child by using the image right next to it again. The start and end of this solution both use a visual clue. Also, if you think it's odd because it uses Mike's input for the final letter, like I mentioned earlier, that just happens to be the exact same thing that happens for Cassidy's final letter too. The 2 puzzles mirror each other. Then finally, after you have all 4 letters in the order of crying child's answers, you use the countless mirror/reflection hints throughout with Avad to get a perfectly ordered and spelt out Dave. This is the biggest part of it to me. There's absolutely no brute forcing letters around required. I think everyone missed that. You literally don't have to force a single letter into place or switch anything up. It just perfectly becomes Dave in the correct order. Again, this mirror is right next to where we solve Cassidy, which I think is huge. Both names are solved right next to each other, making this, I think, the 5th example of these 2 puzzles being directly connected to each other in some way. Honestly, if there's 999 failed attempts at this puzzle, and 1 attempt actually works but just requires a little stretching, although when combined with the visual/context clues shown directly to us, it's actually no longer a stretch, it seems like that one working solution might just be the right one. Especially when there is literally no proposed alternative. I just feel like if you open your mind and go through the solution again, you might realize it's actually not as complicated as some are making it seem. It's quite simple. In fact, I just proved earlier that it's more simple than Cassidy's ever was. Either way, I believe Dave is the name of the crying child and that the tally marks in the logbook specifically are to begin Cassidy's name hunt. And while it is just a theory, it's what I'm going to be using going forward, because I feel so sure about this. So sure that I've made this whole part 2 specifically for those who disagree, instead of just leaving it like I've done for every other theory on my channel thus far. Either way, that's all I have to say about this for now. Please go and watch the biggest FNAF video ever that's a giant resource and guide for the entire community, FNAF the Supreme Guide. And I really hope that you all enjoyed this video and that I may have even convinced more of you to believe that Dave is the crying child's real name. Have a great day, night, whatever time it is, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.